Hey everyone, Shlomo Brody here. Today we're going to discuss a fascinating ongoing debate about the use of an iRobot on Shabbat. And in particular, can you set it to go on its timer before Shabbat to work on Friday night or throughout Shabbat? Now, the truth is this is an ongoing dispute about, in general, how much should we use technology and automation today on Shabbat. And the origins of this actually go back to the times already of the Mishnah and the Tosefta and the Gemara. The Gemara has a discussion about setting, let's say, a canal or water channel to water one's fields, have it turn on before Shabbat, and keep on going on throughout Shabbat. And the Gemara permits it, and the reason being seemingly that we don't have a rule of shvitat kelim. We don't have a rule that we can't use our objects, our utensils, or whatnot on Shabbat, and if it's being turned on beforehand, it's not a problem. The law in this respect is like Beit Hillel and not Beit Shammai, who said that this would be a problem. However, the Gemara does add that there is a problem of placing wheat kernels into the water mill before Shabbat. Right? This is not permitted, even though it would continue to go by its own, automated as it were, throughout Shabbat. Uniquely with regard to wheat kernels in the water, it's not allowed. And the question is why? Why isn't it allowed? And according to one opinion in the Gemara, well, that was just the opinion of Beit Shammai. There's a problem with Shvitat Kelim. But for everyone else, and the norm of halacha would be that this is permitted to put the wheat kernels into the mill before Shabbat. However, another position in the Gemara asserts that no, this is a unique problem. It's a unique problem because there's a problem of Hashemat Kol, that there's a certain amount of loud noise that's produced, and therefore this is uniquely a problem to set it up, even though you're doing all the actions, the malacha as it were, before Shabbat. How do we rule on this issue? So Sfardim, following Rav Yosef Karo, in general are lenient and say there's no problem of Hashemat Kol, whereas the Ramad and the Ashkenazic Minhag, and even many Sfardim adopt this as well, say that there is a problem of Hashemat Kol. Even things which are set up before Shabbat and continue to go on Shabbat, nonetheless, we think this is a problem, sometimes known as avsha milta, that causes some form of noise. What is this problem of noise? So it could be that the noise itself, as Rashi says, is disturbing, and therefore in of its own right, it's a denigration of Shabbat. Or alternatively, as other commentators assert, there's a problem that people will come to think that you are using it actually on Shabbat itself, that you turned it on Shabbat itself. And if it's a type of item which people might come to think that you did on Shabbat, this should be prohibited. Right? There's a problem, as it were, of marit ayin. And poskim, both Ashkenaz and Sfardim alike, take this into consideration when it comes to technology and automation. Historically, there is a big debate. Should we allow automated lights? Should we allow a Shabbat clock to turn on and off lights throughout Shabbat? Rav Moshe Feinstein famously said that he thinks in general all of these are a problem, although maybe lights would be different. But most poskim have not gone in that direction. Most poskim have assumed and asserted that when it comes to things like lights or air conditioning and many other items, we assume that it's not a problem of automation that people will think that you did it on Shabbat. And in fact, they have a medieval precedent for this issue when it came to clocks. There's a discussion in the Rishon that the Ramah brings down the halacha, in which they say that if you set a clock, that even though it'll make noise on Shabbat, tick-tock, and at the top of the hour, nonetheless, we understand that everyone understands how clocks work. No one's going to think that you turned it on Shabbat itself, and therefore it's mutter to set the clock to work, even though it'll continue to work on Shabbat itself. So too, we say today with regard to lights and air conditioning. If that's the case, what's the issue with the iRobot? Indeed, fascinatingly, the former head of the Tzoma Institute, Rav Yisrael Rosen Zatzal, who is a real innovator of halacha and technology, particularly on Shabbat, actually thought that the iRobot is a problem. He says this is a little bit different than air conditioning and lights and other technology that we use. People don't know it, they're not so familiar with it. Also, he thinks the type of noise that's being produced is too loud when it comes to Shabbat, and therefore between both the noise and the problem of a marit ayin, he ruled that people should not set their iRobots to work on Shabbat. But other poskim and leading Rabbanim have taken a different direction, and they've asserted that no, in fact, the iRobot is not a problem. It's no different. A, the amount of noise that you have with an iRobot is not that disturbing. And B, People know how iRobots work. iRobots have timers, iRobots have clocks. They're preset to go on before Shabbat. This is no different than air conditioning or lights, and to the contrary, it's very nice for Oneg Shabbat. It gives you a clean house. When you wake up on Shabbat morning, wow, that's really great. Fascinating is that Rav Yisrael Rosen himself is one of the people that allows to play around with a dishwasher machine in order to allow it to work on Shabbat, even though that makes a certain amount of noise, and even though some people might think you turned it on Shabbat as well, nonetheless, he thinks for the sake of Oneg Shabbat, for having clean dishes, we should allow the tools that he set up in order to make it possible to set a dishwasher to work on Shabbat itself. So if that's the case, what's the difference with an iRobot? It's a good question, and I'm not sure what the answer is in his mind. In my own mind, I think it's a little bit different for the following reason. An iRobot moves, and moving causes a certain amount of a dynamic, right? That makes it a little bit of a feel of like, is this really a Shabbat atmosphere? Is this noise going on, disturbing because there's something moving here? Are people going to think that you set it actually on Shabbat to work and not before Shabbat? And so with new technologies as a whole, I think there's a lot of hesitancy to say, wait, let's see how things develop and how people get accustomed to this technology. Indeed, there's a parallel to this discussion. A few decades ago, there's a big debate amongst the Rabbanim about whether we can set an alarm clock to work on Shabbat. Right? You put it on, set it before Shabbat, and then it goes on and wakes you up for minyan, for a mitzvah, 8 a.m., whatever it might be, on Shabbat morning. Is that allowed? On the one hand, it's beneficial, helps us fulfill mitzvot. On the other hand, it makes a lot of noise, and people might think that you set it on Shabbat itself. And the poskim had a disagreement about this, but the majority came to understand that this is not a problematic type of noise, and moreover, it's not a type of thing that people will think that you did on Shabbat itself. And I think the same thing is true about iRobots. At this point, iRobots, people understand how it works, and the type of noise that it produces isn't really a type of problem. However, and Rav Rosen himself is willing to acknowledge this, right, that maybe certainly is much preferable to set them to go off at times when people aren't going to be in the house, or alternatively at times when people are asleep, like in the middle of the night. Moreover, from my own experience with the iRobot, I'd advise you not to do it right away until you know how your machine works really well. Right? Make sure you know how to set it with the water beforehand and the timing and whatnot, because if there's a malfunction on Shabbat, certainly you have to make sure that you and others know that you cannot hit the button to reset it to go on Shabbat as well, and therefore wait a few weeks till you understand how your machine works. You also have to make sure to time it at a time period when you're able to pick up chairs or whatnot, so that way it won't run into problems on Shabbat as it's moving. Because once it's moving on Shabbat, and here of course is the risk, you can't fix it on Shabbat. If it stops in the wrong place, you can move it. It's a kalisha belachto le'isser, and therefore you can move it if you need that space, but you cannot reset it to work on Shabbat, and therefore you should be a little bit careful in terms of how to use it on Shabbat. But in general, I think this highlights a fascinating debate about how we perceive new technologies and how quickly we're willing to integrate them into the Shabbat experience.